This week, we are recording an episode that is super dear to my heart and that I'm incredibly excited about. It's not uncommon for people to mistake interracial people for being related, whether they are or not. However, in this case, I'm super excited to be interviewing my sister. I was going to say little sister, but I have, in the past few years, I think from her prompting, learned to stop saying little and just saying sister. We're going to be interviewing my sister, Charlene Carr, a book author, and we're going to be talking to her about her life as well as the release of her new book coming out this week. Actually, coming out the day you may be watching the airing of this podcast.
Absolutely. Our podcast is weekly with guests or topics, and you can find us anywhere online by searching BlackLantic. And now our favorite part of the show. I should say our favorite part of like every show that's continuous, not our favorite part, because our favorite part's obviously going to be the guest. How are you?
We just like the intro music.
Yeah. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're not used to this kind of yeah, we get a bit silly on the show.
Yeah. That's okay. I will say now that we're like the way it looks on camera with me and then you and then your sister, I can now understand. Like, I think it's the hair, but I can see why people would be like, "This is your sibling," and I'm like, "Well, we all look great."
But also when you have like people throughout history saying like, "Oh, I can't tell black people apart; they all look the same to me," and I think that's due to a complete lack of exposure to seeing people of different cultures. So I think people are not used to seeing interracial people as much, meaning. When I say interracial, I mean black and white. Yeah. So yeah, they do also not see the slight differences and jumble us all together. Anyways, hello, Charlene.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. I'll start because I want to know about like your perspective of your upbringing, knowing Clinton, but sort of like the path that got you into, being an author. And I know that you're in Halifax now, but I assume that you would have grown up in maybe various different places and like ended up in the East Coast like Clinton. So tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Toronto, North York, actually. The youngest daughter in a family of 4 and the only girl. And yeah, so my parents moved to New Brunswick when I was almost 15 years old. And so that was a huge change, leaving from, one of the most multicultural cities in the world at the time to Riverview, New Brunswick, which was not multicultural by any sense of the word. And yeah, and so I guess how that led to me being an author. I don't know if the move had a lot to do with it. I've been writing since I was a little kid. And every time someone would ask what I wanted to be, it was always, I want to be a teacher and an author. I want to be a social worker and an author. I want to be a vet and an author. That was always part of my dream and what I wanted to do.
I'm curious because I wanted to be an author. And like at the time, like obviously a few years apart, the way that I practiced my writing as a teen was like fan fictions about bands that I liked. So when you're writing as a kid, like what is it? Poetry? Is it stories? Like I'm curious what you started with that led you to like full-on author with novels.
I did a little bit of poetry for sure. I was a huge journaler through kind of my tween and teen years. And I actually wrote my first novel when I was 14. And I don't know if it would actually be considered novel length. I don't know how long it was, but I would say it was like minimum 40,000 words. So, it had some heft to it. Yeah. And from there, I guess I just kept going. I started my second novel when I was 17. That took about 10 years to actually finish. And by the time I finished that, I realized really fully that this is what I wanted to do. And so I was in a job that was ruining my physical and partially mental health. And so I sold my house so that I could quit my job and kind of work for myself, do freelancing with the hope of having extra time to write. And that's where I started to really take it seriously and think of that, hopefully this would be at least a career or a side career, if not my main thing.
I feel like I hear a lot of similarities between the two of you already.
Me and my sister?
Yeah, like the entrepreneurship, the like I'm gonna leave this and aspire for bigger. We had this conversation the other day about me and my freelancing, and I hear the similarities. That's a good story.
Didn't there used to be a story you told about how like your bigger brother sort of influenced you to write and stuff like that? Did I dream that up? Was that complete make believe?
Influenced me to write?
Pardon me?
Influenced me to write?
I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering wrong.
I don't know. I mean, you've definitely had a very huge role in my life.
Okay. I'm not taking any credit for anything.
I think one of the most influential things, and I'm not going to remember the quote exactly, but it was in an email you sent me, and it had to do, and this probably played some role in the decision to quit my job, I would guess, and maybe that's what you're thinking about. I don't know. I was going through a really hard time, and you wrote me something about the fact that, there are always going to be hard times and life is always going to be difficult. But the point is that each time one of those comes, to then set it aside and wait for the next good thing, because there's always going to be a good thing coming. And so, I don't remember if it was specifically that, but certainly that mindset is something that I embraced. And that led to that idea of like, okay, this job is killing me. It's destroying me. And this is not where I want to be and what I want to be doing. And thinking, if I want to do something different, I have to make a big move. And so, quitting my job was a big move, but it meant that I was able to take the down payment back from my house so that if, trying to start my own communications business so that I had a bit more time to write, which by the way, didn't work. I was working like 60 to 70 hours a week. I didn't have much time to write at all, just to make ends meet. I should say I want to rely on the down payment, but it was there, and it did lead to, eventually being able to really pursue this.
Amazing. I want to ask quickly before we pivot, since he brought this up, I just need to know if you have any embarrassing stories about my business partner, because I would love to have something for blackmail, but that's also public knowledge. But maybe you don't. Maybe nothing from your childhood strikes you, but I would love anything you could share would be so great.
No.
All right, next question.
Go ahead.
I'm sure she has embarrassing stories. I think
she's playing nice, and that's fine. If it was me with my brothers, I'd probably do the same, but then I'd say it like off air.
Are you encouraging her to say something off air?
No, not at all.
Okay. People have heard my perspective partially on growing up in Toronto versus New Brunswick and stuff like that. But what was it like for you, other than, Toronto was super diverse and New Brunswick wasn't, but what was it like growing up in Toronto versus New Brunswick? And I know you've traveled the world, and then ending up in Newfoundland and then Halifax, Nova Scotia. Can you share some of the different perspectives? Because I think that probably contributed to your writing style and your writing ability, living in so many places. And I could be wrong about that, but
oh, definitely no. And I think maybe the biggest thing about living in so many places that contributed to my writing is learning, and I think this really came more than anything from living overseas, but just kind of realizing that people are people. And when I grew up in Toronto, I had this idea that Toronto was the center of the universe, and I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Maybe not imagine, but it just like that's where I wanted to be and where I wanted to stay. And it was so cultural and so diverse. And I kind of thought, everything's here. Where else, do you need to go? And moving to New Brunswick changed that a lot. But I think there are differences in people and culture wherever you go. But the core of people just wanting to be connected and wanting to belong and working through all of their, challenges and hurts and issues is just universal wherever you go. And that's something that I really focus on in my writing, and that I think readers really connect to. And I hear about that in their reviews, is that the people feel so real. And a lot of the time, the biggest villain in my stories is the characters themselves. It's the ways in which they are harming themselves, and they are letting, all these hangups and issues and insecurities and fears prevent them from being who they want to be. And so I think through my travels, through my experiences in different cultures, that's really what I've learned and pulled onto and what I put into my fiction. Yeah.
I definitely want to ask more about that self-villain aspect. But before I get to that, I wanted to ask about what you were saying before about what I can relate to, the comms job and 70 hours and trying to get to that freelance. And especially in a similar vein, I wanted to be an author and thought, you know, you have to pair it with another gig to actually be able to support yourself, to be able to actually have money and, you know, feed yourself. And I'm very curious how you got to a point in your career where you've like stopped doing the communication stuff for the 70 hours and made your way into finally finding time to write and obviously getting to the author, the publication that's being out like today, the book that's out today.
So I would say that, you know, a lot of feminists might not like this answer, this idea, but I think there is some feminism in being really wise and just particular about the partner that you choose. And so that was a big part of it. When I was doing all that comms work and freelancing, I was supporting who then became my husband and putting him through master school or a master's degree. And so, you know, I got to the point where I was actually making money from my business and doing, you know, a steady income without having to work those 60 to 70 hours a week. I was getting down to 40 and sometimes lower and making a lot more money. And then my husband got a job in Newfoundland and we had to make the decision, okay, are we going to do long distance? Because at that point we've been married about 3.5, 4 months. And, you know, my job was all in person. I was going into businesses. It wasn't something that I could travel with. And so we decided, no, I'm going to go with him. And, you know, I'd been supporting him the past 2 years and he was going to support me and I was going to focus on writing. And then so that's what we did. And there were a lot of other things that played into that. I was having a ton of fertility issues and the doctors were telling me that, wrongly, I learned later, that I shouldn't be taking my medication to manage the pain if we were trying to conceive. And so, you know, we had another discussion and we just kind of decided, okay, this is going to be my focus right now. We're going to try to conceive and I'm going to do what I can to try to like heal the diseases that were preventing that. And he was going to continue to be the breadwinner. And, you know, when I had time and had the health, then I would continue to focus on my writing.
That's amazing. Also, thank you for being so vulnerable about all of that. Not all of our guests, I think, would do that or say that, but that's super, very real and very honest. And as a feminist, I appreciate like that perspective as well, because it like, I think partnership is super important in life, depending on who you pick for a business partner and a like life partner. No, but it's nice to have someone who can support you when you're sick, when things happen in life. And so that is huge. And I think it is important to mention because I definitely wasn't thinking about that when I was 17 and figuring out if I was going to be a chem teacher and an author or whatever the thing was. So that's a very good point. Good perspective.
I often joke that yeah, my parents finally got it right with the fourth child.
Yes, I agree so far.
You write women's fiction. And you know, when I was young, I used to read like a novel a week. I used to be a hardcore book reader, and I can't say that I am nowadays. But I've read like 3 of my sister's books, and they are compelling. The characters, like you do feel like they're real. You do feel like they're stories from all kinds of different angles and perspectives. The struggles they have to overcome throughout the story. And when I say women's fiction, I don't mean the kind you pick up at like Shoppers Drug Mart, like the hot, steamy. Like these are real deep stories. Whereas I'm just saying, like, me as a man, like I was captivated. I was deep into the story and I enjoyed them thoroughly through and through. So that's really like inspiring to just, yeah, I knew that story, but hearing you say that like on a camera, face to face too, like that is quite amazing. So I mean, so it has been difficult being an author full time throughout all these years, especially because, and we are about to get into your book, but you self-published 9 novels on your own. So you were not only a mom, but you were also an entrepreneur, you were a writer, and then you had to self-publish and market, which you spent a lot of time doing, market all these books on your own. And I don't know over how many years, you can speak to that, how many years you released these 9 books in, but what was that like?
So actually, before I answer your question, I'm going to go to the topic of women's fiction. And that's how I was referring to myself for many years. And it was really maybe a little bit more around the time of Hold My Girl, which is about to come out, that I started thinking about that more, and, hearing about it and seeing articles and the ways in which that term really, I think, limits the readership and the audience. And the only reason it's called women's fiction is because it's about a woman's life and journey. And you're not calling it men's fiction. It's just fiction when it's about a man's life and journey. And so I think we are really moving away from that term in the industry. And it actually came up with the description of Hold My Girl, and that was in kind of the little, elevator pitch. And I said to, I can't remember who it was, but the person in my publishing team who was working on it, like, why don't we just take out women's fiction? Like, why don't we just say it's a novel, about such and such? And they're like, yeah, sure, that's good. And so, yeah, and I think that is actually one of my trilogies. It's just as much about the man. And in the Women's Fiction Writers Association, it's an American organization, they say that it doesn't have to be male or female. The point is that it's about the journey that the character is going on and some pivotal life change from the internal story, their internal journey rather than just the outward plot. And I think that is why it can connect so strongly to a male just as much as a woman, because, men go through those internal journeys too. Men grow and learn and change. And that's the story. That's the type of story that I most connect to, and I think can be a lot more universal because everybody goes through that. So as to self-publishing, yeah, it was a slog.
First of all, thank you for clarifying that. Damn, yeah, we do need to. We do need to throw the term women's fiction right out the window. I don't know if you think if it's even if it's like a hot, steamy sex novel, should that be considered women's fiction? Or
well, that would generally be romance or erotica.
Okay. But yeah, that's really great that you spoke to that, because that is an amazingly relevant point. Like, why does I've never heard the term men's fiction once in my entire life. So I just want
to be fair, I don't know that I had really heard women's fiction either. I feel like I had been hearing more just fiction and about the characters, but maybe that's me. But I also always gravitated more towards, I think, YA before, young adult. But,
so it was like a specific genre. Like you could, in Amazon's categories, like women's fiction would be a genre. And I think I think they might have actually pulled that out in the last year because of all these conversations that are coming up about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what was it like? Like self-publishing 9, that's a lot. That's so much work. I know you talked about you and your partner and the decisions you made, but what was it like for you just doing all that on your own? Doing all that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely know what you mean. And so it's a lot because you're not just writing a book, you're doing all the things that usually a whole publishing team would be doing for you. You're doing the marketing, you're doing the advertising, you're doing the editing, or you're hiring people to do these things, which, is expensive. And so a lot of it I learned to do myself. By the end, I was doing my own covers. I was doing all of the formatting myself. So I learned a ton, and they're amazing skills, but it's this absolutely full-time job. And so it was actually when I had my daughter, after that first year of just trying to, promote my backlist enough that they weren't selling nothing, I realized I haven't written it all. I don't have the time or the energy to write. I can't keep doing all of this and be a present mother. And so that's when I decided I needed to write a novel specifically with the intention of finding an agent and getting the attention of publishers and hopefully getting a good enough deal that this could be my job, my career, at least for a while. And, I had discussed it with my husband, and we had decided that if I wasn't making enough income from my money or from my writing by the time my daughter started school, that I would be making in, say, a 30 to 35 hour a week job. So something where I'd still have the flexibility to pick her up and drop her off and, take some PD days, that I would go back to work. And so I was just like, I don't want to do that. I want to keep writing. So I need to make this happen. I need to do it. And when I came up with the premise for this story, I just thought, this is it. This is going to be the one. And it was.
Wow.
Amazing. I'm curious. Wait, I have more questions.
Yep.
I'm curious about in terms of doing the self-publishing, because I know people presently actually living in Moncton who are self-publishing their books, and I see them doing the signings at Chapters and doing all of that work on their own. And I'm curious if was there a reason that self-publishing like, did you try an agent and it didn't work out and so you did it on your own, or was it like, this seems more advantageous, like have the capacity and it's like a control element, or like why did you end up doing it for 9 versus pivoting the other way?
So the biggest thing was a lack of knowledge and playing small with myself and not having confidence to, I think, believe that what I was writing had enough value that the people who were the gatekeepers would want it. And so when I wrote my first novel, that took me 10 years, I sent it to a few local publishers and I got some really nice feedback, but none of them wanted it. And I thought, okay, I this isn't what's going to sell, but I thought it was good. And I thought it was a great story and I loved it. And also, so I have a BA and an MA in English literature. And so I grew up, and that's what I've read. I'd never read commercial fiction. I'd read the type of things that you study in university. And so I knew that what I had written, wasn't that. I thought it was good. I thought it had value, but it wasn't that. I had no idea how to get an agent. And so I wouldn't say I gave up, but I was in a place of just like, what next? And then a friend I know, a family friend, knew about self-publishing and encouraged me to do it. And I was kind of like, no, like that's frowned upon. This was back in 2013 when it was just kind of starting, and coming from this academic environment, it's like, if you self-publish, it's because you're not a real author, that kind of thing. And, but he just made me promise. And so I wrote a new book specifically with that in mind. I had it a little bit lighter in subject matter, but it still had depth as far as the characters go. And I put it out there and I got amazing feedback from readers. It's still my most read book. Hopefully this new one overtakes that. But it was fun. And it was so rewarding to have these people writing me and telling me how my writing had changed their life. I had, one letter from a woman who said that she hadn't spoken to her father in 12 years, and reading my book and seeing the father-daughter relationship in that inspired her to reach out, and that she'd seen him and they connected and had a great time. There was another story from a woman who had struggled with self-esteem and weight for years and years. And she talked about how my book really pulled her out of that and helped her to start focusing on health and joy rather than just looking at the number on the scale. And so things like that were what propelled me onward. And, I was never super successful financially, but I definitely had that success from the readers. And because I had that and those kind of immediate rewards, I just kept on. But through that, I also started reading a lot of more genre or commercial fiction and learning what was out there and learning about agents and learning about the publishing industry. So when I realized that self-publishing was no longer working for me, I knew what I needed to do. And I knew the type of book I needed to write, and the fact that what I was writing had a ton of value. It was just different from the things that I had studied in university.
Amazing.
Wow. What were those 2 books that you're referring to? One was the second book you wrote, or the second book of that. Well, what was the one that she hadn't talked to her father in 12 years that inspired that, and then the one?
They were both the first book I self-published. So it was originally called Skinny Me. I've changed the title to When Comes the Joy.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. That's right.
Cool.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask in terms of subject matter, just because you talked about it, like this whole being the villain is sort of within yourself and the self journey. I'm just curious if that's, and like only as vulnerable as you want to be, like, is that something about yourself or something you see in other people that you recognize, or something that you believe most people like can relate to, their like shadow self and wanting to be better? Because I find that as someone who's done therapy for 3 years, super fascinating, because I do see within myself where I have an Achilles heel where I'm preventing myself. And I would find that interesting as subject matter to read, but not everybody is so self-reflective. So I'm curious as an author, if that's part of yourself you're putting in the book, or wishing better for the world, or where that comes from.
It's definitely both. So, being a writer, I was in many ways often a very quiet kid. I was often the wallflower. I was observing people. I was observing, my brothers in their lives. I was observing my relatives, the people in my school. I like seeing Clinton's reflection. It's like,
I remember you being the quiet kid. I remember.
Not at home, maybe, but in school, I think I was.
Yeah, sure.
I was really.
Don't mind my face. Yeah, go on.
I was very insecure a lot of the time, but that gave me the time to observe. And so, I was seeing the ways that I hampered my own self. And actually, your expression there, Clinton, was perfect, because at home and with friends and people I was comfortable with, I was loud and I was boisterous, and I would be dancing around and, making stories and acting. But a lot of the time at school, where I didn't have that confidence, I was just very withdrawn and held back. I mean, even into my early 20s, I remember going out with some friends from my journalism program, and it was the first time they'd seen me in like a non-school setting, and I was dancing, like first one on the floor, just busting it out, and they were just like, what? Like, who is this person? And so I think definitely my own experience and seeing others, and just realizing so often we are our biggest enemy. And most of the conflicts that we have with other people, if we took the time to look into ourselves, a lot of that could be resolved, because if we start changing the way that we behave and we act, the things in others that create that conflict would just kind of diffuse. Not always, of course, but I think a lot of the time.
You're so right. I mean, this sounds like therapy right now.
In a good way.
That's something I've been working on learning myself over the years, and it's a very common saying, that you are your own worst critic. You do see in yourself the things that no one sees or pays attention to, and you are the one holding you back, like even the FEAR acronym and stuff like that. But no,
I don't know what's that, the FEAR acronym?
Yeah.
False emotions appearing real, like just like getting lost in your own mind, like your own your own internal thoughts, keeping you from being your full and your true authentic self, because it's no one out there externally stopping you. Even remember that t-shirt? I still have this t-shirt. I don't know, I used to wear it. There's that No Fear brand, and this is showing how old I am. But one of my favorite t-shirts ever, it's on the back of it, it says, if you don't want to win, no one will stop you. Like
valid.
It was an athletic brand, but it was like, if you don't want to win, no one's going to stop you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good point.
No, those were great questions, Hillary. So after self-publishing 9 novels, you went the route of seeking a publisher. And should I say this or should you say this? The big thing that happened, like right after this, we're going to get into details about your book. But why don't you tell? So you finally found an agent.
And
that was a lot of trouble. You worked with them side by side. You had a lot of fears and a lot of doubts. And what happened?
So yeah, it blew my mind. I went into this with the expectation that it would take months, maybe a year or longer to find an agent. I had offers within less than a month, which, was mind blowing. Then I worked with her for over 6 months on revising the manuscript, which was extremely hard, but amazing. And she's incredible. And I'm so lucky to have her. And I hope she's my agent for 20 years. And yeah, so then finally we sent it out, and I think it was in less than 24 hours, we had an offer of a preempt from HarperCollins Canada, which was like my dream publisher. And yeah, it was absolutely mind blowing. And it meant that just from that one deal, I knew for the next several years, my focus could be writing. And after that, we got an auction in the UK, which was incredibly exciting. And a couple of months after, not even a month after that, at the same time, we had an offer from a production company. I won't say the name because we didn't go with them, but a very prominent, well-known Hollywood company that everyone would know the name of. And then my agent, so that was before my agent even sent out the manuscript. And then she sent it out to production companies. So we got a few more. There was an auction for that. I ended up going with an amazing Canadian company. So the novel they're working to adapt it to the screen. It hasn't been greenlit yet, but fingers crossed. And then a couple months after that, we had a preempt from a publisher in the US. And so it's just been mind blowing. And I was talking to someone in another interview, and it was for print, so it wasn't recorded in this way. And I was feeling really hesitant, and she was trying to get me to give more of this information. I was like, oh, I don't want people to think that I'm bragging, or, I just had this overnight success. And she said, Charlene, you had 10 years of working hard with virtually no financial success. And now you've got this. This is not overnight. This is an example of someone working for their dreams and working really hard, and at last it paying off. So yeah, that's what that was like. And it still feels quite surreal.
Wow.
So book deal in Canada, in the UK, in the States, as well as a Canadian production company working for the adaptation to screen, so television series as well, possibly, right?
Yeah.
And okay, so
Also Lithuania. I don't, the Lithuanians wanted it.
That's amazing. I didn't even.
Yeah, so it'll be translated into Lithuanian.
So cool. Yeah, so this kind of thing doesn't happen every day. And also, so you can't say the company in the state that you turned down, but can you say, can you talk about who was trying to convince you to go with that American production company? Am I confusing you?
You mean the actress?
Yeah, so
that was a different one. So there were actually
on Zoom calls with you, trying to convince you to sign with their product. Like this doesn't happen every day.
Yeah. So that was a different one because there ended up being 3 Hollywood production companies who were interested, and then 2 Canadian ones. So she was with a different one, but no, I can't say. Sorry.
So this is gonna obviously
That's
to
so
anyone,
cool,
to everyone who's listening. This book is a really big deal. And should we start talking about the book?
We definitely can, but also I want to point out that like your hope of having more of a readership than the first self-published, it sounds like I that's already there, and it hasn't even it's come out the day that this comes out, but like that's I think a crazy
2 days earlier actually.
Oh, amazing. Yes.
The 24th right? Is when it comes out. Yeah, the launch party's on the 26th. Oh, nice. Okay. Happy early birthday.
To me, I'll go get a coffee.
Talking to our mother today, I did get confused about that. I had thought it was the 24th, and it is. But yeah. So the launch party's on the 26th.
Perfect. Yes.
I'm going to try to come to Halifax. I'm going to try to be there if I can.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, if there's a storm in Toronto and I'm stuck overnight, which it's looking like, I'll just come with. There we go.
Sounds good.
So tell us about the book. Tell us what you can about the plot and what to expect and why so many people across the whole world are so interested in it. I'm really excited to hear about it.
Yeah, so it's a dual narrative novel about 2 women who go for in vitro fertilization, and a little over a year and a half later, they find out that there was a switch. And so one woman is raising the wrong daughter, and the other is grieving the loss of a child who was never really hers.
That's so good.
Thank you.
Wow. So hold on. You mean one of the babies doesn't survive? So there's 2 women, 1 baby.
Yeah.
And oh my God.
Yeah,
which is very common with IVF. A lot of the time, the babies don't make it to birth.
Of course.
Yeah.
But at what age is the child when it's discovered that
if you can tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The child had been implanted into the wrong mother.
So she was 10 months old when this came to light. So in most of the cases that I've read about in the States for this, it happens either in utero or as soon as the child's born that they realize there's been a mistake. So, but for my novel, I had it that it's not just till the child is 10 months old. So this mother has been raising this baby, fully thinks of her as hers, has a relationship with her. And so, as you can imagine, that brings in a lot of complications. And yeah, it's a very dear story to my heart as well. The premise came from my own life experience. So as I mentioned earlier, I had my daughter via IVF, and she emerged looking totally visibly white. My husband is white, but even so, she had straight blonde hair. She had gray eyes, which neither of us knew on either side of our family. And her facial features just entirely looked like him. Like nobody really seemed to see. My mom said so, but nobody else saw any of me in her for the first several months. I remember, Clinton, at one point, you were just like, it's unnerving, like just how much she looked like my husband. And so I was scared, I was really nervous. I remember one time at the dinner table, my husband was looking at her, we were all sitting, and he said, do you think we should get her DNA tested? And I was just like, no, I don't want to know. And so the thing that I was always thinking about was, what would I owe to this woman who presumably had gone through all the struggle and heartache and pain that I went to have a child, but yet I was potentially raising her daughter. And so thankfully for me, like my daughter's features really changed. Her hair curled, it darkened, her eyes turned brown, you can see me in her so much now. I have no worries that she's, not mine. But that then gave me the freedom to explore what would have happened if she hadn't been mine, if there had been a mistake, because this happens. I actually interviewed the head embryologist at my clinic, and it's happened in Canada. It hasn't made it to the news, but it's there. And so that's really what I delved into, all of those fears, all of those concerns that I was having those first 4 to 6 months, and putting them on characters who, in this fictional world of the story, this actually happened to.
That's so compelling and so interesting. And I have so many more questions, but I also I understand I just have to read the book, because I'm like, what are their reactions and how does this happen? And I just want to know this. I just want to know the whole story now. But no, go ahead. Tell me what you can.
I was going to say another layer that I think, for the purposes of this show is really interesting is that in my story, I do have one of the characters be a mixed race Black woman. And so it's the same scenario of this child being white. And then there's also a lot of complications that come in with that, because, if a Black woman is raising a child who is white and not biologically hers, obviously there's going to be a lot of fears that arise from that as well. And so that was a really interesting thing to explore.
That is super, super interesting. Wow. I want to ask about your writing style and how your inspiration comes, and we got into a little bit about the the self-villainization and stuff. But now I'm curious as well about, and I've always wondered this for successful authors, but the research that goes into that. So interviewing the embryologists and using obviously your own personal reflection on this possibility. But what is that like in terms of, I'm going to do this much time is research, collating information, making sure because I used to do does the timeline make sense, and fleshing out the characters before actually writing. And I know some people just, can have inspiration, can write, and then will, tweak everything later. So for you, what was that process like in terms of, I know I need to delve in more into this realm of possibilities and what that would have felt like from, statistical standpoints and all of that stuff, and then getting into, the meat of the book. What's your process like?
So it's a little different for every book. The last few, I've really delved into plotting. And so I might take 3 to 4 months to kind of outline and plot my stories. And so there will be some research that happens during that time. Some of it happens more when I'm writing. Sometimes, if I don't know something and I know it's going to drag me down a deep hole and I want to proceed with the story, I'll just put a little note for when I'm revising, okay, research this, call a social worker, figure out the legal logistics of that. And so that'll come in later. But yeah, I definitely really focus on plotting out the stories and the characters as much as I can. A lot of it for me is asking questions. So if this happened, what could happen next? And, asking myself a ton of questions and then choosing the one that I feel makes the most sense, and then going on to the next point of the story. Okay, well then what would happen? And trying to find the things that, will get those characters into a place where they are challenged and they really have to struggle through to either make the right choice or sometimes the wrong one, and how that will then affect both their internal journey and the outward plot.
Here, we're just going to pull up, I think, if I can, another photo of the cover without everyone seeing all of my messy life. But I'm I can't tell how it looks. Probably not great. You had the book in your hands, but here is another photo of the cover of the book, and I'll let you. It would be better if there was a better way for me to let it select one screen. You have
there
that.
You go.
Amazing. Perfect.
Lovely blurb.
So, we can see, just based on the premise there, you can see why it's such a compelling story, and why so many agencies jumped on it, and what good television that would make as well.
I wanted to ask another question too, in terms of the asking the questions and the plotting. Do you know how you want it to end, and then try to ask questions to get to the end, or is it, I have this scenario and what would it be like, and what are the endless possibilities that I could choose, and almost like a choose your own adventure by using that plotting, questioning method?
So some books I know, some books I don't. For this book, that was the first thing. I thought of the premise and then I thought of the ending. And it was actually, I mean, it's changed a bit, but just in how it was kind of laid out and written, but the actual ending and the core of that was pretty much the first thing I wrote. And so throughout all my plotting, it was always, how do I get these two characters to this point? You know, how does that figure out? And there were a few times when, you know, certain things seem like they should go another way. And it's just like, no, because this is the ending to this book. And so for me, for this one, that was super, super clear.
Amazing. Awesome. I'll ask the next question just because I'm the one who I was super curious, but you've touched on obviously the racialization element of the book, how it plays into the plot. And I had obviously, without knowing the plot, noticed, you know, the Afro textured hair on the cover, and I could tell at least one character was. And as a Black author, a Black woman, a Black Canadian, I'm curious like how important it is for you to include Black characters into the novels, and like as at least as a plot point or representation, and like having it on the cover, like why it's an active choice for you, and like if it's very important or if it comes naturally just because that is your life and you want your own representation, and if you could speak to that at all.
Sure. You know, so if they had chosen a cover that didn't have the characters on it, I wouldn't have been upset. But with one, you know, I have a lot less kind of influence than obviously I did as a self-published author, though they certainly asked for my opinion, and they did take some feedback, like this color scheme was something that I totally came up with. They had a very different one initially. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want it looking like it was two white characters when they weren't, or even unknown. I think, you know, obviously with this cover, it's not necessarily a Black person, the purple one, but it looks like it. And I think that's important in that representation. Whoops. But anyways, yeah, I think I certainly do have some books where the characters are not Black or mixed race, but I think most of mine do have characters of that. And I guess it's just because it's closer to what I know, as well as, and actually my next book that I'm working on really delves into that. There are not a lot of books, certainly almost nothing that I read growing up. Maybe I can think of like Dion Brand, but there's not a lot that looks at a mixed race experience. And so that was really important to me. And so I don't think I have any characters who are, you know, monoracially Black in any of my books. And as, you know, I didn't grow up within a Black culture for the most part. It was my white family that I was seeing most of the time and interacting with. I'd see my Black family, you know, maybe a couple of times a year. As far as friends go, there was a big mix. I definitely, you know, was welcomed into some friends' families who were Black, but I'm not quite as familiar with that culture or experience. And so when I do focus on creating Black characters, generally they're mixed race. If they're a, you know, a major character within the story, I certainly have characters who are minor characters who are of, you know, a variety of races and ethnic backgrounds. But yeah, I think it's what I know and I want to experience that. And as I said, with my next book, it really delves into that experience of being biracial and trying to understand oneself within a culture that is just kind of, I think, starting to become familiar with that. And, you know, our generation, you might be the next, no, you're part of our generation. You're a millennial, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, and so I want to explore that more, because when I was a kid, I don't know that I really knew anybody who was mixed race. There was one family in a court up the street, but the kids were like 9 years younger than me, the oldest kid. And so that, yeah, it was just, I didn't know kind of where I fit. And my friends, my Black friends, didn't know where I fit. My white friends or friends of other races simply labeled me Black. And that's not quite accurate, you know. It's kind of like, it's just something I want to explore more, and I think it's important for people to understand. I look at my daughter who's 5, her friends, and there's mixed race kids everywhere, but for people in our age, like, unless you happen to be in a community where that was common, there was a lot of feeling on the outside and a lot of not knowing where you belonged or how you fit. And I think most of us have really had to work through that without a lot of help and without a lot of guidance.
No, absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to ask, is because like I don't remember reading any books growing up that had any representation. I like majored in English as well, so a lot of the classics and Wuthering Heights and that type of stuff that certainly no, unless it was a black slave, and then
Mhm.
anything more modern, it seems that either they are I forget exactly what wording you use, which I really appreciate, but like mono-racially black. Is that what you said?
Mhm.
I've
Yeah,
never heard that term before. I
I've
really
never
like
heard that
that.
either. Yeah.
Yeah.
I might have just made it up. I don't know.
We're gonna use it now.
Yes.
We're adding it to our dictionary. But that was a lot of the people I spent time with, not a lot of mixed race or biracial people, and same thing in books. Like even I think, if I understand correctly, Hermione's supposed to be black and was, you know, put in the movies as white, and so everything sort of got assimilated and washed out and whitewashed. And so seeing that like curl pattern on the covers, and then like you're right, it could just be someone with that hair texture that's white, but knowing that you are a black woman, I presumed, and so I
Mhm.
really appreciate that that answer, and now knowing that the character is as well, as makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said that so often. Like,
Mhm.
we grew up, like, our parents were married in the 60s, like during the civil rights movement in the States. And while we grew up in Toronto, and our school probably had kids from 30 or 40 different countries attending, there was no one that was like us. There was no one. There were no mixed race people. It's very common nowadays, but there were no mixed race people at all. So it's amazing that the stories you're writing, especially because there are more mixed race kids, and they probably struggle with some of the same identity issues that we struggled with. It's great that that is available and out there for them nowadays. Well, so what people really need to do is buy this book and check out this book. So this book drops and is available on January 24th. Hold My Girl by Charlene Carr. And where are people going to go buy it? Where do people need to go and find this online? We are going to figure out a book giveaway ourselves. We're going to be giving away a book on our channel one way or another. We're figuring out the details about that. But where do people need to go to pick this up?
Well, the phrase I always hear in publishing is wherever they sell good books. And so, you know, it should be available at Indigo. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it through Kobo. Most of your independent bookstores will either have it or be able to order it in for you. And yeah. And if you're listening overseas, it comes out February 2nd in the UK. Americans have to wait a little longer, October 10th. But podcasts last a long time. So maybe you'll be listening to this and it's already out in the US.
Amazing.
Yeah, maybe. Or I mean, if you're in the US, maybe you can use a VPN network and like buy it online or something.
Well, actually, yeah. Is it bookshop.org, I think? Ships worldwide. I think that's what it is. And yeah, so you can get it for free worldwide if you're in the US.
Will there be an audiobook?
Bookdepository.com. That's what it is. There is an audiobook that's coming out January 31st. And yeah, actually.
Did you narrate your own?
No, I didn't. I didn't want to. They didn't ask, but I would have said no anyways. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was actually labeled as one of January's best audiobooks on Kobo. So that was very exciting.
Oh yeah, so this book's been getting rave reviews. I was about to wrap up, but I actually forgot about that. You've been getting rave reviews by other book authors, publishing companies. You were just recently in the Globe and Mail for 30 top books to look out for 2023. If you want to speak to that quickly, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Yeah, of course.
And
I guess I'm really excited, and I'm so thrilled that people are responding to this story. I think the most exciting thing for me is some of the messages that I've gotten from readers who, I mean, the book really delves into infertility and pregnancy loss and the experiences of that. And I'm getting messages just saying that they were really scared to read it because of that, but it's helped them feel so seen and less alone. And, you know, that was one of my biggest goals for this story, and putting so much of myself and my own experience with those issues into this book. So if anything, that's what I'm most excited about.
That's amazing. Congratulations. I'm very excited to read it. However, we end up giving away a copy, I'm just going to also get a copy, like add to cart 4 or 5 copies. So thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for taking the time to come on and talk about the book, Hold My Girl. January 24th,
thank you for having me.
Yeah.
A birthday present, I got a book. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, Charlene Carr on socials, is that the best way to find you? Just type it like on Instagram and Facebook, Charlene Carr?
Unfortunately, I have different tags on every place because it happened.
Yeah.
I tried. But anyway, Charlene Carr Author is my Instagram, and that's where I'm most active. The other one's just like every now and then I pop in, but I'm on Instagram almost every day. So that's the best place to find me. Or
To
my
our
website, charlenecarr.com. And from there, you can find everything else, and you can find the links to order the book.
To the people listening to this on audio, it's Charlene Carr, CharleneCarr with 2 R's. And yeah, to our listeners, I always thank everyone who gets through to the end. We're getting a lot more visual, which is great. And yeah, whoever's listening to this, whether it's audio or video, make sure you subscribe, leave us a rating, follow us on Spotify, Apple, everything like that, or Instagram, Facebook at BlackLantic.
Comment.
Please comment.
Comment.
And yeah, so thank you so much. This has been
Thank
such
you.
an honor for me. I'm very excited and happy and proud for my sister, obviously. And yeah, so Charlene Carr, based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, with the release of Hold My Girl.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Should we play the outro?
Play the outro.
Okay, we're going to play the outro. Okay. Do a little dance. All right, we will see you next week.